Thank you, Neil. That introduction sounds much nicer than I see myself in my head. First an apology. I had prepared a written speech, but decided to make a few changes. Just from today, listening to the introductions, there's a lot of nostalgia, and some of the fellows have come to ask me a number of questions, and so I thought I would kind of share my experience differently today. So I apologize if I don't sound as coherent. So it's been 5 years, and a lot has happened. But one of I think maybe a good place to start is what some of the most durable takeaways were at the time when I was a fellow. In 2014, the fellowship started in Charlottesville and ended here. So it's interesting to come to the place where things ended and they're now starting. And within the fellowship, I think it's interesting because a big number of you are lawyers, like myself, but there's also different people doing different things. There are people looking at urban planning. There's people looking at environmental issues. There's people working in the police, So it's a very interesting cohort this year. Within the definition of the Presidential Precinct, I think what value you find the most is in how the precinct explores leadership. And so you're going to interact with a number of people, and they'll give you different perspectives. Some you'll challenge, okay, because someone's going to come up and they'll introduce someone as an expert in Africa and say, wait, I have 25 years of, Africa expertise. And that's what the experience is about, that you exchange ideas, you share, and you kind of learn from each other. Neil was telling me that this year he plans to stay in the dome with you guys. And that's what the precinct's about, that they're constantly trying to create and learn. And so anytime you feel that, I don't know about this, or I don't understand this, it's an environment where they're trying to build a family where just speak up, share, and then if you feel that it will create a better experience for you, that's what the precinct's here for, to create that experience for you and to build that community. And so when I left the precinct, I really left with a deep understanding of what community was and what civil society was. At the time I came, my interest in contributing to society was to link citizens to parliament and to try and get as many people as possible to understand how laws are made, to understand the legislative process, to understand these debates. Because again, you usually have that disconnection. Members of parliament, by the time they go to their constituencies, it's election time, and then people will not see them until the next election cycle. And so I did that, and when I left the precinct, I had a lot of success. It was amazing. And within a year, we'd been able to turn over our budget, by over 100%. The team grew, from just 2 people to a team of about 12, if you count full staff and volunteers. Our partnership expanded beyond Parliament to the Auditor General's office, and then with the awards and attention, it gets to your head. And so, I don't necessarily have a very exciting journey, because for me, what then I learned is to constantly ask, okay, what value am I adding? Am I still with the principles that I started with? Where are my values? And so in 2016, having run Parliament Watch, at the time when it was maybe at the peak of its success, I resigned to my board, because at that point I felt that I didn't have enough management expertise, I guess, to run such a big team. And I said, now I want to go on a journey on learning. And so I guess for the fellows, it's okay. This morning they asked you to write your plans. Where do you see yourself in 2040? What's your vision? And I remember watching yesterday, actually, I watched the video, Drew, that you recorded, where they were asking fellows, what are you going to do when you go back? I have not done what I said I was going to do. Because at the time I was going back to, I was from university, so I was going back to change my faculty. That's what I wanted to do. I have not done that. It hasn't changed. But I've gone on to learn so much, and I've gone on to do so many interesting things. And a lot of that would not have happened without the network that I got from here. For example, after resigning to my board, I hadn't made a plan. I didn't know that. Always make a plan for transition. And it was another fellow from the precinct, Njeri Gatero, who's in Kenya, who now she's now the executive director of the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Organization, that just filed and lost, but filed a petition to challenge and to have homosexuality decriminalized. And so she said, listen, okay, so you're finished doing that, just come to Kenya, because that's how she is. Anyone who remembers her character, that's how she was. I said, I just get up and move. She said, yes. And so I looked for jobs in Kenya, and luckily there was a perfect fit with the Aga Khan Development Network. They were looking for someone who enjoyed building things, and they were trying to build a civil society initiative for East Africa. And so I went and started to work at this. And with that then, I got a new understanding of what civil society is. Because with the Aga Khan Development Network, the interpretation of civil society is that it's about you, it's about the individual. It's more than just the organization. But it's also about private sector. It's about everyone just kind of putting pieces in place. And so that was 3 years ago. But over the last 5 years within the region, as civil society has become more active, and for those who are not from Africa, if you notice that a lot of people who end up in law school, a lot of the bright minds in Africa do end up in civil society. They do end up going to work to improve the communities. But so as this is coming up, and as people are working for rights, the governments have, taken a different approach. So there's a bigger clampdown on the space for NGOs to operate. There's arrests of activists, especially people who speak out, with the coming of social media, which basically opened up the Arab Spring and sparked this revolution of opening up democracy in Africa. It's made a lot more governments very anxious about what, the potential for technology. And so this tool that has become so important for young people in their activism, in their daily work, is now being used to try and again limit the space in which people can advocate for a bigger space for civil society. And so I left Aga Khan and have been working with the Henrik Bolt to see how do we design strategies to better support people who are working on the ground and who are doing this work every day. So as you can see, it's not been a very clear path. It's been a different, a very different journey, but it's helped me learn so much. And like I was telling Neil, now I feel that, okay, now I'm ready to go back home and then to redesign, start again, because I love to build things and see, okay, what else can we do to make, Uganda, more open and to support civil society in Uganda. And so my first advice to the fellows is to keep an open mind. Things are very different. The lessons are different. Some of the areas are not in the areas you're very specifically working on. Some are not relatable. In 2014 when we came, because here there's a big shift away from GMO production towards more, what's the word? Organic farming. Whereas back home, there's a shift from organic farming towards GMO farming, And so you have to constantly learn to take what you're getting, what's happening and what lessons are trying to be learned, and then translate that to back home and see what can I pick and what can I take back. But I think also as you go back, you also need to think about yourself, because sometimes as people who work in the civic space, as activists, you focus so much on doing the work, on being an advocate, that you forget about yourself. Activism, yes, is driven a lot by anger. It's driven a lot by anger. You need to get people on the streets so that you can get the attention of the governments. And anger is great because it gets that attention. It helps you advocate for a number of things. But when you're a leader, you have to think about the sustainability. And to sustain movements and to build them into something more structured, that has to ride on hope. And that can sometimes be very difficult. When every day all you see is this negative news, all you see is these negative effects, it can be very hard to keep that momentum. And so you have to change how you look at Africa. So on the one hand, if you're looking at yourself as a young person, 20s, 30s now, you're living the demographic of what Africa is. So your parents are getting older, so you have to take care of your parents. So you have to deal with the realities of the healthcare system, the insurance system, these things, that you see on paper, these numbers you block off, that you tick off. But we also start in your own families. And so you have to think about the education system. your child needs to go to school. What does that look like? And so then you can no longer just focus. It can become so hard to just focus on this one area that you're trying to have some positive impact, and it can be very overwhelming. So you need to constantly remind yourself to be optimistic. Try to stay as optimistic as possible. So, and there's a lot to celebrate right now in Africa, despite all of the challenges, you know. We haven't had a coup in a while. Zimbabwe, we can debate that. But, you know, things have changed. The transitions have changed from coups, and now there's more citizen protests, but there's more demand for democracy. And, you know, one of the countries that I'm so happy for is like DRC. You know, because when we're young, our generation, yes, there's someone from DRC here. We grew up on Lingala music. DRC defined a lot of our culture as a continent. And so to see what their political journey has been so frustrating for some people. But to have seen, can you imagine DRC has gotten a peaceful transition of power before Uganda? Yeah? So there's hope, you know, there's hope out there. So constantly look at the positives. And also as a continent now, foreign remittances from Africans working abroad has now overtaken private, foreign direct investment. That means Africans are investing more on the continent. So you have to constantly look for the good news about why you have to keep working and why your work is important amidst all of the bad news. Secondly, I think that it really helps a lot to plan. So just plan. Every time they ask you, think about 10 years, 20 years, it's okay, because most of the time you may not achieve what you plan, but when you plan and you write it down, it helps you keep going back to what your vision, what your goal was. It may change because circumstances change, but even the change helps you show where your growth is going, and it will keep you grounded in terms of trying to ensure that you get the impact in where you're going. And lastly, I would say is just make friends and have fun. Because that's what the fellowship is about. It's a break. It's a break from doing so much. Let your guard down. Meet people. You have only 6 weeks, and those 6 weeks fly by. So get to know someone else. Make friends. You're not going to stay in touch with everyone, but you're going from this fellowship, you're going to get 2-3 solid friends who you can call, and they'll be there to support you. In 20, 50 years, someone will be a president somewhere, someone will be the head of the police somewhere, someone will be the attorney general, someone might be at the IMF, and these are people that you were exchanging with, and these are your alumni, so that network is important. One of the biggest questions that I've gotten today has been, but how do you do it? How is this helpful? How's the fellowship going to change my life? It's not. You're going to live here and still be the same person, but it's going to open your mind, and then it's up to you to make that what you'd like for it to be. So with the things that you learn, with the principles, for example, and I hope they're also doing design thinking this year, you can learn to focus in terms of how you're designing. With the experiences that you see, it really changes that. And in many ways, the impact of the network is not immediate. But one day, 5 years from now, you'll need a contact from Namibia. And you'll say, oh, I remember this person. Or one day you'll call Neil, and Neil will say, oh, by the way, there's this program we're trying to run. Can you help facilitate that? So stay in touch, leverage. Don't expect immediate impact, but the impact will be felt over and over again. And have fun while you're doing it. The beer is cheap here, and it's really good. So enjoy. Thank you.